Today my guest is Sai Naik from Sagetti. How you doing, sir?
Pretty good, Dave.
We're talking about SharePoint today. How long have you been doing SharePoint development?
I'd say about 4 years now.
4 years. I say development, but there's more to SharePoint than development. There's setup, there's maintenance,
Yeah, there's
configuration,
implementation, and then there's development as well.
So what drew you to SharePoint? Why is that a good solution for your customers?
I think it was out of necessity. I started using SharePoint back when I worked for Amway, and they were looking for a solution to store their documents and then add some customization on top of it. And rather than trying to write out a whole new content management system or a new way of communication, and we're talking about an organization that has offices in 40, 50 different countries. And so how do you calibrate the permissions? How do you share documentation? How do you version it? How do you develop customization on top of it, workflows and things like that? And so at that time I hadn't used SharePoint, and I was looking at different types of solutions, open source solutions. It was actually an IBM shop, and they used WebSphere. And I came across SharePoint, and I compared SharePoint to WebSphere.
Okay.
And I found that SharePoint, for the end users I was targeting, were more used to that Microsoft platform of Office and Outlook and Word. SharePoint, they already had their desktop. They were more familiar with that environment. And so when I played around with the different solutions, A, in terms of development, can I develop custom workflows and custom features and web parts around it? And then B, in terms of how much quicker could I teach it to an audience that tends to be more towards the retirement age. So they were not as Gen X or Gen Y just playing with technology.
So they weren't really computer savvy.
They weren't computer savvy as much. They could learn it, and they already knew Office. And so to me, when dealing with those factors, and also the company already purchased the licenses for SharePoint, so it made sense in terms of it would speed up development time. It needed less development, less code, and the end solution would come out to be the same, and it's easy for me to transfer knowledge. There's a lot of pre-built documentation I could use. And it was the first experience I had with SharePoint, and I oversaw that project, and I architected it. We implemented it, and we're talking again about multiple countries that would log in, would share documents, would write comments, develop workflows around it. And I just found it fascinating, and I decided to move more into that aspect as a profession as opposed to working for a big company, to work with other companies and other people to show this great technology of collaboration and portal development.
Okay. So you said you were able to get this software up and to the users faster because you had to write less code. There was less development.
The solution.
The
solution. And that's the key with...
Why is that? Why is it less code?
I think it's the key with SharePoint. I always tell people knowing SharePoint's a very important aspect of using SharePoint. Knowing what its capabilities are. Because when you know the full set of capabilities, when you can hear or you can look at the business process and the business flow, right, you can know what certain tools or what features it has to address those. A lot of times when people don't know all the functionalities and features, they start and it's easy to do that, and I like to just go custom, right? We have to customly make something.
Okay, and I think I've seen this happen. So you're talking about the person that's implementing SharePoint, and they don't know that this feature already exists, so they go out and write a custom solution, maybe a web part.
Correct, or a lot of times the exact thing doesn't exist out of the box, right? And it's going to take either joining multiple web parts or lists or functionalities when I search, or how you can retake the out-of-the-box tools. And I was looking at like a recipe, right? How the end user can add different ingredients to come up with an end solution. But the key and the way I approach projects is to minimize code, increase delivery, increase utilization, and that's achieved by making things less complex and things more familiar to end users. And I can't underscore going outside the development community more into people working in marketing and finance and other areas, how much more familiar they are with that Microsoft platform and that Microsoft look. And
much more so than what?
Than IBM or open source technologies, and so because
that's because they're running Windows in their desktop.
They're running Windows, and the great thing SharePoint has client integrations that allow people to type documents, send it up for collaboration space. They try to make it more user-friendly and intuitive. So I found it as a very strong choice to accomplish a lot of things that want to be accomplished. But again, the big key is, even if you're a developer or if you're not a developer or however you use SharePoint, is really try to maximize and learn all the technologies and functionality that it has present before you go tackle a project. Because if you can do that, there's even ways you'll start learning how you can take two different things, bring it together, and come up with a solution.
Okay, so that's, knowing SharePoint, that's a challenge because it is a big product.
It's a huge
But
product.
Let me ask you this, so what's, I'll ask for the elevator pitch. If somebody comes up to you and says, what's the SharePoint thing? What is it?
It can be used for multiple things. I don't think it's a quick answer. You can use this collaboration. Right? What is SharePoint? It can be used for collaboration. That means pure document storage.
Okay.
Just here's our central repository. We don't want to use a file share any longer. We'd like to have metadata tagged to it so we can search and query it. You can use it as internal portals, right? Instead of developing like a team site, in the past we had to make wikis and blogs and RSS feeds. There's a lot of that functionality built in. You can, trim through security. You can make an LDAP on top of it, so you can do different types of stuff. You can run enterprise applications from it, treating it like the old Microsoft content management type systems. And you can, work with Hyper pages and controls and keep those pages stored within SharePoint. So you can do multiple things: internal, external facing sites, extranet sites, collaboration, by itself. And so it has so many capabilities. Again, it goes down to what does the user want to accomplish. And a lot of times when I hear customers say multiple things they want to accomplish, I say, hey, there's where SharePoint's a great tool, because you can use it in different types of avenues.
Okay, so is it fair to say, you mentioned here, collaboration, portal, built-in security. Some of these things, they may not want everything that SharePoint offers. Is it fair to say they can still get value out of it? They just want
they want one or two.
Content management.
I think there's an equilibrium. I think there's a point where you have to look at what the business needs are, and you may say that license might be too expensive, or there might be a more optimal route.
Well, there are two versions of SharePoint, one of which is essentially
Correct.
free. I'll put finger quotes around free because you need to buy
which is
server,
which is still
Windows
expensive, in the grand scheme of things. So you have to take the balance. I would just say that I think for a lot of customers it makes a lot of sense. And what I try to do is, even if they buy it for one thing, tell them about the multiple ways that you can use it. So.
Okay, so I as a developer, I could just build my own portal. I could write code. I've done this before, just from scratch, write an ASP.NET application and build security on top of it, and then I could have a part of it that is used for sharing documents. But I think the message you're giving is that why bother to do that when it's already been written for me?
Two reasons,
does
yeah.
that, right?
A, because of that, but B, because of just the maintenance. I think a lot of times as consultants, what we forget is that we might be technically savvy, but somebody's got to maintain this beyond us.
Okay.
And you've got organizations like New Horizons that does SharePoint training. You have lots of documentations and books that exist around it.
Okay, so it's
if you
a
develop,
standardization thing.
so if a developer develops a custom tool, that's great. But now we're going to have to be forced to write documentation, and every time there's a question, right, and post-support maintenance. Which here you've got a product that does a lot of that stuff.
Okay.
That has standard protocol that you can just say refer to that book.
Okay.
And you can give them some training, but you don't. It's not custom. Right? So if you're not accessible, it's not the end of the world. And that's why I really like it, because things you develop for it become more of a team mentality. And it becomes a standard thing. It's not burdened upon one person. You can always find SharePoint administrators out there. So when I'm consulting with companies and they say, well, why SharePoint? I say, because you can find a lot of SharePoint people who understand web parts and how to maintain it and add content to lists and libraries.
Okay, so it's less expensive to maintain.
It's like, you don't have to train. So if you have an employee who walks off on the job, you can probably find 15 other employees or recruit people who have done it before.
Right.
And so therefore you're getting a maximum return on it. And when I develop a solution around those pre-built packages, whether it be content types or lists or XSL, right? Still within that framework, and a framework that other people understand. And so it might have a theme pack that gives a different custom branding, or a special XSL that'll render something out in the content query web part.
Now you're just looking at the face of it, just changing the look.
But you're changing,
but under the hood, the engine stays the same.
And people learn the engine, right? And so people who learn administer, who don't have to be developers, learn how to administer SharePoint, can go from one custom SharePoint to another, as long as you keep that engine the same and the framework the same. You run into challenges when you really start not understanding all potential SharePoint, and rather than trying to really work on using the SharePoint framework on the solution, doing things custom, because then it's just as good as if you customly developed it. In fact, it probably takes more time, because now you're stripping out a lot of the SharePoint features, right? And now you have to make a brand new user guide and a new knowledge transfer
It makes
session.
the upgrade path harder as well.
Correct.
To the next version of
Correct.
SharePoint.
And so for consultants like us to understand all that, and our job is not just to develop a cool thing, but it's to make a great ROI for our customers.
Yeah.
And so the ways of doing that is, how do you work with the staff you have? And a lot of times I meet marketing departments, communication departments who want to do internal portals and corporate communications, and our companies that want to do external sites. And so it's leveraging this site, this apparatus, so to speak, right, that is so commonly taught and known, and working within that framework, not because it's the coolest thing to do or it's what's enjoyed to do, but that's the reality of it. It's easier to maintain, and so it may not be the perfect thing for Sai or for developers or for Dave, but it's really great for companies. And I think over the years I've come to acknowledge that, and I've seen the impact of it. You know, when I first started doing SharePoint, you're fighting it, but like, this doesn't belong for enterprise applications, and you have to strip it down. But after I've seen and talked to customers 2-3 years removed, I see how powerful it is, and how much sense it makes.
Let's talk about when SharePoint doesn't fit, when it doesn't have that feature that you need, and you need to extend it. How extensible is it?
I will say over our last couple projects, we've done more with hybrid pages, which is simple, just .NET controls, right,
Okay.
within inside of these ASPX pages.
Is that the same thing as a web part?
No.
Okay.
And that was the mistake I used to make when I
What's
first
the
started SharePoint. When I first started SharePoint, I thought everything had to be done in a web part.
Okay, and you
Right.
said a hybrid page is like halfway between?
Yeah, so what a hybrid
something-
page does is
something
it has
else,
the
right?
publishing controls inside of it,
Okay.
and you can still have web part zones,
Hmm.
but in your Steam HTML layout on the page, you can actually put your ASCX control inside of there, inside of your
Okay.
ASPX page, right? And when it renders out, there's the control.
Okay.
Right, and so rather than so that stays static. Unlike the web parts, you can't move it around.
Mm.
But what that allows us to do is go just a simple .NET development. And a lot of things that are complex, where you don't want to have to do the full deployment methodology within SharePoint, it's hard to develop. It's a great, quick, and clean way to make a perfect page. And we've done it on projects; it's worked well. And I think that new knowledge we have has really helped on projects. When you try to do everything in web parts, you do run into some issues, and so that's why these are neat techniques and tactics that you can do. But I really always recommend, again, that's staying within the framework. Even if you do that, hybrid page methodology, you're still provisioning a page in SharePoint, you're still making a template, right? You're still giving it a classification of a page layout type. So still stay within the framework.
Okay.
But then this allows you to do development on top of it. The worst thing to do is to strip it out, strip out the SharePoint functionality, the features, because that's not really getting anywhere. It's to build on top of that framework.
Yeah, we had Jesse Murray was on my show a couple months ago. He emphasized the same point, that you really want to work within the framework of SharePoint.
Correct.
In order to build on its strengths. What are the weaknesses of SharePoint? What are the situations when I would not want to use it?
Where would you not want to use it? I think, talk about collaboration. If you only have 2 or 3 employees, not a lot of documentation, that might be too much horsepower.
Okay.
So if you're a small business, you might want to use something like, Microsoft Office, Live Space, Google Docs, something like that, right?
Okay.
Something smaller, because again, it's not needed on everything.
Okay.
So that's one area I'd say wouldn't make sense. I think with the new hybrid pages, I think it's opened a new door for me to help architect solutions.
Mhm.
So I've been more of a proponent to use it. In the past, I'd say if you're doing a custom enterprise solution, there's no need to really bring up SharePoint. But I would say actually in hindsight, it's a good content management tool, so to use it.
So you're saying that if an application has any content management and it's of a certain critical size and it has some collaboration involved in it, then we should be looking at SharePoint.
I'll give you an example. I think there was a site, which I once worked on that had a lot of e-commerce to it, and they threw SharePoint layer on top of it. The amount of content there wasn't a lot. And so the question became, do you really need to use SharePoint, or are you just throwing another product on top of it?
Okay.
So
that's one more
because
thing.
sometimes things like Commerce Server have ways where you can tag content to a product catalog.
Right.
Right? And so the question is, well, did you really need SharePoint to have it, have another section to put that content, associated with the product? And so, again, collaboration, each situation is unique. I don't think SharePoint's a bad product. You just have to make sure are you getting good ROI out of it?
Yeah, that's
And again, that's the job of the consultant, because usually companies come in and ask us, here's my problem, how do you want to solve it? And you got to, especially in the roles that we play, we have to pick technologies to help expedite it, because they're only giving us 2 to 3 weeks, to make decisions and start implementing it, and we're always on time cycles. And that's why we leverage a lot of these prepackaged solutions to help expedite that, because we don't have the manpower anymore, budgets are tighter, and so that's why you use a lot of these products.
Okay. Anything else you want to tell us about SharePoint or about yourself?
Like I said, I think it's a great tool. What I always tell people is you don't have to be a developer to get a great return on it. I think if you have a development background, that's great. I think you can do a lot more capabilities.
Well, before we go, so
Yeah.
I want to stop on that one. Do you think it's possible for an organization to implement SharePoint without any developers?
I think you get pretty far with it. I think you'll run into limitations, but I think there's a lot you can do. I think you can maintain the nice thing, and now this applies to SharePoint 2007. If you went 3 years ago, my answer would be no. If you come today, I'd say yes, there's a good strong chance. You've got things like Bamboo Solutions, who makes
What's that?
it's a third-party company that makes terrific web parts, right? Weather web parts, city web part, calendar web parts.
Okay, and those are for sale?
They're for sale. So if you're not a developer, you can plug in that. You've got Coplex, which
A
over
lot of that stuff's free.
which over 3 years now. Again, when it first came out, and we know SharePoint 2010 is coming out. When these products first come out, there's none of these things there.
Right.
So you really need a developer then if you're going to utilize it because there's nothing that exists.
Don't you need a developer to integrate those third-party components?
No,
into
they've
your
given,
SharePoint?
I
Just plug right
believe,
in.
I think they've given such great instructions these days that anybody can do it, right? Step by step, and you just deploy it and you install it and it shows up. And so those are things I think help WAS have gotten so good. Heather Solomon's blog is very good for custom branding. So I think in that regard, the necessity, especially in SharePoint 2007, to be a hardcore developer has diminished. I think if you're moving to something like SharePoint 2010, which is unknown, you're not going to find the stuff on Coplex and Bamboo Solutions or Telerik and these third-party tools that you can use to really enhance it. And then I would think you would need, need a developer. But if you're not a developer, you can go pretty far.
Okay.
You really can. You can use things like content query and XSL and the search features and a lot of the pre-made web parts and just simple designing pages. I think you get pretty far on the end product. And so a lot of times when there is a non-technical group or smaller IT staff, it's something I always suggest because, like I said, it allows people to create content but less of a burden on a very small IT staff that has to do the computers and the laptops and the desktop images and the email and everything else. They don't need another thing on their plate, and so sometimes that helps as a tool.
All right, Sai, well, thank you very much.
Appreciate
your
it.
time.
I use technology to find new friends.